In this video, I discuss conducting your interview. As I mentioned in my previous video, you're going to want to be well prepared prior to your interview. You're going to want to make sure you have a well-researched interview guide. You need to be physically and mentally prepared yourself. And of course, you want to be well supplied with a recording device and a backup. Things can go wrong. But if you've got some sort of backup plan, you can salvage a difficult situation. Be sure to consider your setting. You want to make sure that both of you are comfortable. You're going to be here a while, and you want to be able to share without distraction. So that's the second thing. Limit distractions. Now, somebody's new puppy, that's probably fine. But too many people being around, that may change how your narrator is going to tell the story. Are any amenities you need nearby? If you need some water or you want to take a bathroom break, are you going to be able to do this comfortably? And of course, I can't stress it enough, make sure your recording device is not only working, but is actually picking up everything they want to say. At the beginning of the interview, you're going to want to record all the basic facts right away. Do not wait. This is something you cannot do later, even if it's an awkward way to start off a conversation with someone. You're going to want to collect basic demographic data, their current age, their age at the time you're talking about, how they self-identify, their ethnicity, all the basic things that you'd want to know. And maybe even if it's relevant to the story you're asking, have they been married? Do they have children? It depends on what your conversation is going to be about. In addition, you want to record all the basic facts about the interview itself. Time, place, date, all of those things are important to have on the record from the start. Finally, if there's a current event or something going on at that point in time that might impact the way the story gets told or the emotional load of the story, be sure to note that at the start of your interview. It's important because you might not remember later. So what are a few basic things to keep in mind? First of all, if you're wondering about how long each session should be, usually to 60 to 90 minutes is considered about the right amount of time. Less can be okay, and a little more can be fine too, but more than 2 hours can start to be a little bit taxing. Always keep ethics in mind. You're not there to pass judgment, you're there to collect a story. And finally, people are frequently inaccurate. We often misremember things. When we tell stories over and over again, we tend to exaggerate and embellish details to make a better story, and we mix in other things from other points in time that we remember as happening then that may or may not have happened at other times. You're not there to argue. You're there to collect the story the way they remember it. That in and of itself can be important pieces of data. How people remember things also tells us about which things were the most traumatic, which things stuck in their memory, which things were told as a cultural narrative in a particular way. So you're just collecting the story as they tell it. You're not there to argue facts with them. You're going to want to start with open-ended questions. Questions like, tell me about, can you remember a time when, describe. You're going to want to avoid leading questions or questions that push the individual into a particular direction or ask them to express a specific mood. Avoid strong reactions, either agreement or disagreement with what they're saying. You're there more to be a neutral observer to the best of your ability. Be sure to go slowly. Really, you want to be asking one question at a time and leaving yourself sufficient time to ask probes or follow-up questions. And don't forget, you need to ask for help for jargon or colloquialisms, expressions, anything you're not understanding. This is the moment to ask them to explain it. So what are you doing while they're telling their story? You're focusing on that story while recalling your background research. At the same time, you're going to want to be taking notes so you can ask follow-up questions. Can you cue the narrator with dates or factual information? What I mean by that is, can you remember where you are on April 29th, 1992, if you're asking about the LA uprising? You're giving them the date so that they know exactly when it happened. That makes it easier for them to have to go through their memory and figure out exactly when something happened. You also want to look for nonverbal cues that there may be more to a story. Take a look at how your narrator's acting. Is there something more they're trying to decide if they want to tell you or not, and it might be a good moment to encourage them to go ahead and do that? Make sure you get all the relevant details. Who were they with? What was going on? Everything they can remember about the important facts of the story before you move on to the next part of the interview. And make sure you have reasonable expectations for what they know. Not everyone's interested in politics. Not everyone's interested in sports. If you're asking about a very specific event, make sure it's relevant to their life in some way or that it was something of interest to them. What are some things you can do to make things go a little bit more smoothly? Having visual aids like photos or maps or newspapers or something from their past or three-dimensional objects can really help get a person's memory going or get someone talking. Make sure you use your nonverbals to encourage storytelling. People will often look at you and then, based on how you're behaving, decide to tell you more. Make sure you get all the details correct and clarified while you're sitting there and in the moment. It's a lot more difficult to go back to it later. And be sure to feel fine about taking a break if you need one. Sometimes, just a few minutes off and a person comes back refreshed and ready to keep going. Talking can be exhausting, and your narrator may need a break or just a glass of water or to rest their voice a little bit. What do you do in an oral history interview with silence? Well, if it's just that they're giving you a nonverbal response, you can go ahead and say it verbally so you have it on tape. I see that you're nodding. I think you're agreeing. And then you could even ask them, could you expand on that for me? What if they're just not a talkative person and you're not getting really in-depth answers from them? Sometimes it just happens that way. I did a project where I interviewed over 100 people. Some of them, I would say, tell me the story, and I would then say nothing for 40 minutes. Other people would, give me a minute, and then I would have to ask follow-up questions. Do you think they need to take a break? Is what you're discussing difficult for them? You don't know what's going to trigger a difficult or traumatic memory. The well-being of your participant comes first. When it's time to wrap up the interview, you want to make sure, if you need to schedule your follow-up interviews, that you at least put your heads together at this time and give it a try, even if you have to adjust that later. You definitely want to check in with them, especially if you did discuss something that was difficult or painful for them. Thank them and follow up with more gratitude. They're doing us a great service with sharing their stories. And when it's over, go ahead and let it end. Sometimes it's actually hard to leave. You almost want to stay in the room, especially if it's been a particularly powerful or meaningful story. I know you want to hold on to that moment forever, but hold on to it in your heart or your mind. Thanks for joining me today.